Hey, Derek, I think we'll be ready right at 3 o'clock to start. So I guess this is recorded for later.
Yes, I'll give you I can give you a countdown. RTN is ready. I'll give you the countdown in 5. All right. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. To see you all smiling faces again as we kick off another Transportation Committee meeting. Today we will discuss two topics, micromobility as well as our strategic plan. We will open it up for public comment after the micromobility piece, for I understand there are some that have signed up to speak to it. But at this time, I will send it over to our Assistant City Manager, Ms. Tansy Hayward, to introduce staff and start the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Branch. We have Michael Moore, the Director of Transportation, that will give your first presentation. This is an update on two previous conversations that you've had on micromobility that were collecting information and setting kind of the baseline for this conversation. There is some suggested action that you could take and report this item out of committee today if you chose. So Michael will go through some of the additional data gathering that has happened since your last meeting and walk you through both some short-term and long-term recommendations or opportunities for the committee, should you choose to recommend those to the rest of the council. With that, I'll turn the floor to Michael Moore.
Good afternoon. It's good to see everyone again, and I am going to go ahead and pull my screen up so we can start to see this. We'll just give that a moment. All right, can everyone see that? Great. So, good afternoon. I'm going to start today by, just kind of recapping. It's been a little time since we've been together. We started this conversation back in January and February. I thought it might be good for us just to kind of recap some of the conversations we had previously, and we'll do that briefly, not into any great detail. Before we do that, though, I did want to just take a minute. This is the commercial part of the presentation today. We had a very significant milestone back in January, in the 1st of June, end of May, with Citric Cycle. We passed the 100,000 mile mark, which is a really good milestone in that this is a little bit older data than what I just showed you there, but it shows you that we're actually exceeding some of the expectations that we had in our projections. We had really looked at trips on the order of around 25,000 in the first year of operations. We're at a year of operations and we're at 47,000 trips and have really extended actually beyond our year 2 anticipated goal. So really good news on that regard, and it's been really good to see how consistent some of the utilization has been since we've gone into this sort of COVID age that we're in. So let's on to scooters and micromobility. Just to reset on current conditions, you know, we have a master encroachment agreement with Gotcha Scooters. They are currently, as of yesterday, had about 150 scooters out on the street in Raleigh. We worked with them on that master encroachment agreement. It was to be revisited after a year. We'll be coming up on that date here in a few months. We have some recommendations for you as we kind of get into the meat of the presentation a bit later about that. And also just want to note that we do have a second operator here. Lime is present on the state campus, NC State campus, but it does not currently have a master encroachment agreement with Raleigh, and it is limited to that location. Just a little bit of data here. This comes from some of the dashboards we use with Gotcha. You can see that we are down on usage here, which is to be expected in the kind of COVID environment that we're in. You can see in this is a little bit, the last slide was from May. You can see in this slide, when we go back into March, you can really see the downturn as to how the pandemic has really affected micromobility. You can see some positive trends as we kind of come out of May and head into June, where the trends are starting to tick back up, which I think is a really good sign that we are seeing some things return back to something like normal. You can see this is also some good data kind of about some of our hotspots on usage, showing where trips start there near Moore Square and the transit center at that location. Of course, Glenwood South and the Warehouse District and Fayetteville Street continue to be pretty heavy starts for folks just beginning their trips. You'll also recall in February, at the end of February, we did have some input about the program from some of our operators here, Gotcha and Lime, and then we also had Spin, share some of the trends that they were seeing in the industry. We wanted that as just to kind of have a round and complete picture of kind of where we were with the industry. And those concerns are things that we pretty much know: safe streets and sidewalks, some of the prescriptive parts of the encroachment agreement, fleet sizes and operators, number of operators here, what makes sense, what doesn't, and then what kind of tools might be out there to kind of reinforce positive behaviors. Council also asked us to do some work about kind of a broader net on that, and asked us to look at a survey. We put out a questionnaire to share that with 15 micromobility companies and 6 organizations that are related around the micromobility industry, folks that do data aggregation, things like that. We also shared it with the National Association of City Traffic Officials, that NACA, which is kind of an industry leader in kind of the shared street space, micromobility space, and alternative transportation space. We shared it with their micromobility listserv. And we got responses back from 5 companies, 1 organization, and 4 cities. Unfortunately, we put this out right about the time people started going into lockdown with the pandemic. So the return was not quite as robust as we had hoped we might see, but we did see a ton of good information that kind of came back out of that. There were 3 main themes that kind of emerged out of that, and that was one around policy and how an effective policy can affect a community's ability to adapt, what kind of investments that got made in infrastructure, and also a lot of conversation about how vehicles were defined and what how that definition kind of created the regulatory environment that we're in. And for example, here we operate in a situation where we define scooters more like mopeds than we do like bicycles, and those operational characteristics create some friction in between how we can actually allow and permit and innovate in kind of some of those spaces. We have a suggestion for you as we kind of go forward with this. Second option, a second theme that was there was also just kind of discussion about kind of strategies that folks in other communities had used to promote and enforce positive behaviors, like education, a lot of emphasis on creating parking zones and nodes, and some abilities to create reduced speed riding. And then the last theme that emerged out of that was pricing and regulations and how they encourage or prevent optimization of fleet size. And we know that there's ways that can happen in a way that's good and creates that kind of, it balances user demand, but also kind of balances how many scooters you actually see parked on the sidewalk doing nothing. So we saw a lot of good conversation out of that. There are in your package, in the agenda materials, kind of a very thorough summary that staff put together for you on that. So if you'd like to see all the responses, I would ask you to refer to that. I do want to recognize the really good work that Barbara Godwin and Fontaine Burris and our staff and our transportation planning group had done to first put that together, but then to aggregate all those responses. And very grateful for them for that really good work that we can share with you today. Then lastly, here's a few considerations just about program expansion. And these are things that I think we have discussed in the past, but we'll just, again, recap them real quickly. Things like how many operators should we have in Raleigh? What's the proper fleet size overall, the proper fleet size per operator, the proper fleet size for the community? And how can we build in some flexibilities to expand and contract the fleets? Our Other things that we should think about: capacity and willingness to partner on safe streets and on sidewalk investments, appropriate balance of liabilities. Is there an appropriate pricing structure? Do we do that per device, per ride, or perhaps through a hybrid model? And then what is that level that we set that particular pricing? And then should we create, some reduced speed zones, some zones that we just know we don't want micromobility to access? We do that on a temporal basis now with downtown events when those were present. So do we want to consider that? And then are there just some zones that we would prohibit parking altogether? And then other things like how long should we make the master encroachment agreement run? And then what kind of flexibility do we have to allow innovation and the kind of adaptation of the industry? And who does that flexibility reside with? Is that staff or the council? So from that, we've derived a set of next steps that we'd like to ask council and the committee to consider today. The first, we know that the state was looking at redefining micromobility and scooters in particular to kind of get them out of that moped basket and then back over into more like an operational characteristic, like a bicycle basket. That has sort of stalled in the General Assembly. It's not been taken up for a while. We would suggest that council could direct staff to draft a definition for our code so we can get parameters that, again, better fit what we're trying to work with and regulate, rather than something that we know is a very imperfect if it's a fit at all, a very imperfect fit. Second, in the near term, we'd like to recommend that we extend the current gotcha master encroachment agreement for another 6 months while we look at a new selection process and while the market has some time to adjust to pandemic realities. We'd also like to take that time and that opportunity to maybe adjust the MEA as well to deal with some incremental changes, allow quarterly payments that would work a little better for the operators. Not just gotcha, but perhaps going forward with other operators as well. But a quarterly payment works well for us in that it's not a lot of extra work, and it's a little easier for us than monthly. Monthly may work a little better for the operators, but that quarterly seems to be a very good balance versus an annual kind of approach. Future MEAs, we'd like to revisit that and bring a version of those back to you at your next committee meeting. We'd like to suggest that we could look at those liability requirements on insurance and indemnity. The payment schedules and fees, we recognize that one flat fee annually based is probably maybe pretty inflexible for what we're actually trying to accomplish. We would suggest that we would like to try a hybrid model of a very low per scooter flat fee to make sure that companies are actually vested in the city and don't leave because when they find that they're just not meeting margins or for whatever reasons they may have, we would look to where that benchmark would be and bring that back to you. And then a low per ride fee, which I think is where the industry is kind of moving today. And that per ride fee, we could adjust so the flat fee on the per scooter fee and that kind of balance out to meet the kind of sweet spot that we're looking for. We do think we'd like to include some permitting for dynamic fleet sizes that staff could allow for that adjustment. We could create a maximum, but then look at kind of a utilization rate and parking compliance data to say once a scooter company or a fleet is seeing extensive utilization and we're hearing that we don't have scooters available, we could allow some expansion of that fleet, and we can bring a methodology back and include that in the MEA. There's work around data sharing and data privacy that we have another recommendation that'll show up a little bit later about how we want to accomplish that as well. That we'll also make sure that it's clear in the new encroachment agreement. We do currently have an equitable device distribution in our MEA, but we'd like to expand on that to make sure that we include access and payment methods to make sure that we are having companies provide that to all of our community in Raleigh. And then what tools that we could permit to help create some positive behaviors for users. Some geofencing, while that's kind of an imperfect tool right now, it continues to get better and better. And that's one we'd like to make sure that we have the capacity in the MEA to address as we move forward. Next, clearly there's an interest in expanding the number of operators that are in our market and expanding the number of scooters that we have available to Raleigh. We would suggest, and I think you also heard from the industry, that could be done through a competitive process, and we would suggest that we would start a new process like a request for qualifications. It's what we used previously, but there may be slightly better tool that's something that is qualifications based and performance based that we could use to select up to 3 operators to enter into new MEAs. And we would start on that process just as soon as we have some direction. And we'd like to make sure that that is in place, that we've gone through the complete process, that we've got all the MEAs signed, and make sure that that is completely in place for the spring of 2021. We'd like to move quicker if we could, but we recognize that winter is not necessarily always the best time to launch. We saw that in some of our other communities around the country, and we recognize that there's some seasonality to how scooters are used. So spring of 21, we want to make sure that we're up and ready to go and on the ground with that at that time. Just a few of the qualifications or the criteria that we'd want to look at. We won't go through all of these, but in generally what we're trying to look at are flexibilities, the ability to partner, the ability for companies to demonstrate that they're responsive and responsible on issues like clutter, helping us remove devices when we've got inclement weather events coming in, as such, how we work with privacy on data, how we would create this sort of data-driven plan for fleet sizing, and then create some flexibility in the MEA so we have the opportunity to innovate. I think that's really important that we are kind of in a I won't say a rigid situation now, but the ability to create some flexibility and to do pilots is a little more restricted than what we would perhaps want to see in a new MEA. And then lastly, staff would like a little direction. We would begin a process to try to find a third-party data aggregator to help us insulate us a little bit from the data privacy concerns that are out in the community. You may have seen that Los Angeles was recently subject to a lawsuit. And we think having a third-party aggregator that would be able to create a little separation from us and the actual data that companies provide would help insulate the city, and could also help us greatly with some data analysis and reporting, and also help us utilize a group that has these relationships with other cities and other companies and help us kind of understand where we sit in terms of performance and the like. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you've got, and thank you very much for your time today.
Definitely. Thank you, Director Moore. At this time, any counselors have any questions? As everyone just went private. Okay. All right. Now I can see you. All right. Any questions from anyone? First, we'll go with Counselor Milton.
Yeah, I'm hesitant to go first because I don't want to hijack the direction of the conversation. I think everybody knows my interest in this subject. I have one actual question, and then I do have follow-up comments, but I'm happy to hold those until after Councilor Stewart speaks and after we receive public comment, if that works for you, Mayor Pro Tem. My actual question is, when does the gotcha MEA actually expire? I know you said it was intended to stay in place for a year, that there's not an expiration date in it. I guess the question is, when is that year up?
Council member, it would be, we had some delays in getting the initial MEA signed. So we would have been in that situation right about now. We did not end up signing the MEA and have it executed fully until August of last year. So we've got about another two and a half months or so. So I want to say August 23rd was the date it was actually executed. So we have a little bit of time, a little bit of runway on that.
Okay. I have a great deal of other comments, but I'm going to hold them until we're ready to figure out some action.
Okay. All right, Counselor Stewart.
I, as usual, just want to say thank you so much for all the work you've been doing on this. And also thank you for covering the bill at the state legislature around the definition of what a scooter is. I know that's something we've been waiting on. And so I'd be very interested in making sure that y'all have clear direction to create our own definition in the meantime. But I just want to say thank you. And this is great stuff to keep it moving forward and really looking to find a way to make it work. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation as well. I think addressing the General Assembly is key. I think us making some first steps is very important, and eventually they'll probably catch up. As far as the overall recommendations, are those, I'm assuming if we were to approve those recommendations, what's the time frame of implementation? Let me ask this question: which recommendations would take the longest to implement?
We would want to make sure that we're on track with what we've shared with you. So we would first start with creating the new MEA, just to make sure that when we can bring that back to you, perhaps in August, just to make sure that we're on track with that. And I look forward to Councilmember Melton's comments, because I know that those will have some pretty significant and helpful guidance for us. We would start with that first. I think drafting the new definition would also be something we would want to bring back to you very soon. But then the selection process would be a piece that I think we would, that might take the longest, just because there's a bit of, we're going to have to advertise, we're going to have to receive, we're going to have to go through those and make sure that we're being thoughtful and deliberate in our analysis of those. It's a committee process. We don't just, it's not just 2 or 3 people sitting, but a group of people doing that analysis. And so that will take the longest. But again, I think we're prepared to get started on this right away. We've been, because we've not been able to be in front of you, we haven't been standing still, but it would be nice for us to be able to take some really positive next steps.
Okay, so I see Councilor Milton. I'll be with you in 1 second. So if we give approval today, then council approves on July 7th, then basically you're saying the draft new MEA would be the end of August, and then the process part will probably start off in September, October?
Yes, sir. That would be correct.
Okay. And that'll take about 6 months to go through?
Yeah, it would probably take us about 90 days to go through.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a little quicker, but once we've got folks selected, we've got to make sure that we're executing the agreements after that. And that took us a little bit of time last time for us to pull together all of the paperwork that we needed. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Councilor Milton.
Yeah, I had looked at all of this information before the meeting today, and thank you for pulling it all together. My initial thoughts are this, and I'm just going to put it out there for discussion. I think that we should refer out of committee the proposed text change to define what a scooter is so that we can get that process started. I think that we should direct staff to bring back to our next committee meeting proposed new MEAs that we would use once approved and sent to council that they could then use to select additional providers. My thinking is that we should not extend the gotcha contract since it's up for another 6 months, since it's up in August of 2020 anyway. And I say that because my preference would be to move this process forward quicker and try to get some different options in the market on the streets for fall if possible. And if we're able to do that, gotcha could just participate in the process for what we're calling in this presentation future MEAs. So instead of giving them another 6 months, if we can get the text change started, which seems like an independent piece, at our next committee meeting, we can hopefully approve the new MEA, and then gotcha can participate in that process with the other providers as well. My part of your presentation was asking about the authority to select. That I think that staff should have the authority to select the providers once they go through the MEA process. You know, as council members, I think our role, sort of like a nonprofit, is to set big policy direction for the city. I think we will have done that once we approve the MEA and the text change. And I don't think we should be in the weeds being the individuals selecting the providers. And I'm wondering that if we proceed that way, if there would be a chance to have more companies rolling maybe sometime in the fall. I understand the weather concerns. I think it may depend on, it's going to depend on a lot of factors, right? It's going to depend on how COVID continues to affect our establishments, and it will depend on the weather as well. But I would hate to push this to spring 2021 if we had the option to move it quicker. And so I think getting the text change going, approving the new MEA at our next committee meeting, and then having everyone go through the process late summer, early fall for potential, fall deployment into the spring would be my preference. And that's just my ideas.
Council member, this is Chauncey Hayward jumping in, and I'll probably look for some help from Brandon and part of this as well. I think from a policy perspective, we could certainly take the direction not to continue with the current MEA and extend that. From an expectation management perspective, I think the process of developing an RFQ, advertising it, closing it, evaluating it, and then negotiating the final agreements and the legal process. I think the time such to do that is not such that we could have a seamless transition. I think there would be a gap in service before we could get those reasonably provided, just partially because of the process time that would be inherent in that process. I do believe, to your point, that in the recent delegation that the council gave around right-of-way actions, I do believe that staff could administratively accept an encroachment agreement at this point, given your prior action on encroachment agreements, which was not the case when the prior master encroachment agreement was in place. I just want to confirm that with Brandon, but I believe that is the case today.
So I'm going from memory, but I believe the encroachment delegation to staff was limited to telecommunications purposes and subsurface improvements, but we could certainly provide an item to the council, likely for consideration. I think back in coming with the text change in August, that would provide delegation to staff for encroachments along these lines, subject to whatever terms are in the final MEA or in the code change.
Yeah, so my intent is I'm not trying to remove gotcha. I just thought my goal was to allow the process to start earlier, and it seemed counterproductive to extend them under the existing MEA for 6 months with hope to do a new process sooner. If we need to extend them so that there's no gap in coverage, I think that's fine. But I think my big goals here would be to give staff the authority to select the providers, not have that be a council decision, which I think is an appropriate staff decision regardless. I also think it will take less time if we don't have to be involved. So I think where I'm at is I'd like to move the text change process forward, approve a new MEA at the next committee meeting, and do what we need to do to give staff the authority to be the individuals who decide the 3 providers, and then to do it sooner if we can.
Right. And I think I understand exactly what you're saying. I think the key is making sure we don't have a gap in service. So I think from what I'm hearing, maybe we say 6 months or until new contracts have been signed, whichever is shorter, which I think would cover that piece there. But what I want to do is, I know we have some vendors who actually have called in to provide, and I want to open this up for public comment before we move forward with any type of vote or action. So Derek, can you assist me? I want to give everyone about, how many people do we have, Derek, signed up or who actually called in? Derek, can you hear me? Because I cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was trying to do the timer. We have 3 different organizations and at least 3 speakers from there, depending on if somebody else wants to chime in from the organization. Potentially 7.
So potentially 7. So what I will do is I will give each one about 2 minutes to speak, and then we'll kind of go from there. So if you can just introduce who they are when they come in, because I don't have a list, and then we'll, if y'all can state your name, your organization for the clerk, and then we'll go from there.
All right, Sam Reed. All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great, awesome. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and thank you, Derek, and appreciate you letting me be here. Like I said, it's Sam Reed with Bird, and I'll just go if that's cool. Take my 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Sam Reed with Bird, like I said, thank you for having me. Bird, we're one of the largest, most experienced e-scooter companies. We've actually started the first e-scooter program, and we continue to be solely focused on micromobility. We've learned a lot along the way. We've stepped on a few toes, as you all know. We've grown now to over 100 cities across the globe, and we've learned how to do this right to effectively partner with cities, particularly progressive and innovative cities like you all. Want to commend Director Moore and the staff. Everything that I've just heard and everything I've read is exactly along the lines of how we would suggest that you all proceed with a new program. I think just hitting the highlights, doing an RFP process to select the most qualified operators and then hold those operators to high standards. That's exactly what you're seeing cities doing across the country. And, the cities that I oversee, Atlanta, Nashville, Memphis, all of them have recently done that exact same thing. We would like to see, as suggested, flexibility in the number of devices, dynamic caps, enabling operators to increase their fleets during high utilization times, lower them during times of that are slower. In terms of fees, was really excited to hear that you all are thinking about a per ride structure fee that really aligns incentives along with our incentives, right, to get people riding. Cities like Phoenix, Austin, Orlando, Santa Monica have all recently moved towards a per ride fee. Also, one other thing was not mentioned, developing recommended parking, preferred parking in a location around the city. We've done that in a lot of cities, and we've seen it really make a difference to help with clutter. In Nashville, for instance, where I am, we've got actually Bird does incentivized parking.
Thank you, Mr. Reed.
Thank you.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was your 2 minutes.
That went quick.
Yeah, it does. And luckily I did 2 and not 1.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
I was thinking about that. Yeah. All right. Derek, who do we have next?
April, can you hear me?
I can. Actually, Reed said everything. I work for Bird here in North Carolina, and he covered everything. So I will give back my time.
All right. Thank you, April. All right. Who do we have next, Derek?
We have Matt Phillips.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Matt, Derek, what was April's last name?
Ralph, it was Bird.
No.
Yeah, her actual, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I'm sorry, Matt Phillips, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm actually deferring my time to Lindsay Gray. She will be speaking on behalf of Gotcha.
Okay.
All right, Lindsay.
Hi, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Thank you all for having us today. And I appreciate this topic being on the agenda. Thanks for having a partnership with Gotcha over the last year. We are happy to oblige an extension if that is what you all so elect in order to get the rest of this plan in place. We've also gone through several changes over the last year. We are now one of the largest publicly traded shared micromobility companies where we offer an e-bike, a stand-up scooter, and a sit-down scooter that meets the qualifications of a typical stand-up scooter, other than it has a seat. So we're excited. We've been engaging in conversations on the state level as well, and trying to push that same topic of introducing a shared micromobility, or revisiting the scooter bill that was presented the year prior. We also are very interested in a partnership with NC State and them also opening up their relationships as well to match what the city's doing. We feel like that alignment could really be impactful for this. Dynamic caps, the per ride structure, happy to work through those and excited that y'all are looking at those great tactics, as well as preferred parking. And we are also able to meet those MDS standards regarding data, and working with a third party is something that we actively already do, and happy to do that, continue with that, and can press on with a lot of what you're talking about. So thanks for having us and hearing our thoughts, and thanks for the great partnership so far.
All right, thank you. That's 4 people. Do we have anyone else, Derek?
Yes, sorry. Rory, are you going to use your time?
I'm Rory with Gotcha. Lindsay spoke on behalf of us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Todd O'Boyle.
Hi, everyone. Todd O'Boyle from Lime here. I will speak quickly. I do want to thank Mr. Moore and his team for making some very strong improvements and solid recommendations. We are the exclusive provider at NC State, and we've been that way since 2017, so we know Raleigh well, take it very seriously, and can't wait to get back on the streets of Raleigh. I would say, just as a couple of recommendations, given the size of the city, we ask that you consider issuing no more than 2 MEAs to ensure the market is not subdivided to an economically unsustainable level. We like the dynamic fleet cap to incentivize tidy operations and efficient fleets. We love the quarterly per trip fee. As Sam said, Orlando is doing just this. I want to skip directly to Councilman Milton's point. We would also like to get this done sooner rather than later, and Lime could deploy tomorrow if we needed to. So with that said, we understand that a process is necessary, and we're not going to rush things. We're happy to collaborate on the definition language, happy to continue to collaborate on MEA language and improvements. We would suggest as maybe a way forward, and I think other operators like Bird would agree, maybe a 45 to 60-day extension of the Gotcha MEA, which should maybe be the best of both worlds. That would allow ensure continuity of service and allow all of us to be a part of a competitive process, so that we can ensure that the city is served by the best resourced and high top flight companies. With that, we just want to express our appreciation and excitement to be a part of the conversation. We would also, I'll mention that we have our jump e-bikes that we'll be deploying on NC State's campus. We see that as a complement, and we're not in any way looking to displace the Citrix cycles. We think that's a great multimodal success. And anyway, I hope you'll consider a 45 to 60-day extension of Gotcha while we move this process forward up.
All right, thank you, Tony.
All right. And I have Bradford Johnson.
Mr. Johnson?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right, perfect. Derek, if you can you also send those names over to Ralph so he has them for the record? That would be helpful.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem, I do have one more. Katie Sims, she was part of Gotcha. She's logged in. I'll just with her real quick. Is she? Katie, did you have anything?
Yeah, sorry, just struggling to unmute. Nope, all good. Okay, just wanted to echo what Lindsay said. Thanks for your time.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to thank you all and all the vendors for that feedback and information. I was definitely taking a few notes. And one thing I was thinking, and it goes back to Councilor Milton, what you were saying about the time frame. The reason why I guess I was thinking 6 months or sooner. So basically, you know, it could be 45 days, it could be 90 days, but it also, in case some roadblocks or something happens with the process, there's that flexibility, and we don't have to come back for another extension, you know, in that time frame. Because my understanding is, and this, I think this is the key part, does their current contract end in August, or does it end in a few months after August?
Mayor Pro Tem, the city attorney can correct me, but I believe the exact language is upon 1 year of launch. So we signed in August, and we launched a few weeks later. I'll have to look at that exact date, but it was a few weeks after we got everything fully executed. So it was 1 year after that. So
basically, kind of September is what we're looking at.
September, October. I'd have to look.
September, October. Okay. I see Councilor Milton. Go ahead, Councilor Milton. I have a thought, but I'll let you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you know, it feels arbitrary to try to put a time frame on the extension. I think we all agree that there needs to be extension, so there's no gap in service. We certainly thank Gotcha for being the first participant here through this process. I think Mayor Pro Tem Branch's suggestion is right. I think what we should do is we should extend for 6 months or until the city is ready to execute the new MEAs, with the understanding that Gotcha would participate in this MEA process. And so I would look to our distinguished city attorney, Brandon, for figuring out how we could draft the extension language that it would be 6 months or until the MEAs for the new process are ready. I think that's the right way to do it because there's flexibility in there.
Yeah, Brandon.
We can certainly draft an extension that allows for the selection process for new vendors to be parallel with their operations under the extension. And I don't think that providing the extension doesn't need to hit the pause button on the process of revamping the MEA and going out and seeking new vendors.
Okay, cool. So from what I've heard, I think Councilor Milton, unless other councilors have a thing, I think you've kind of worded the motion already if you were willing to make it.
Yeah, should I break this up into pieces or do you want me to just say all of it?
I think one motion should cover it unless someone else thinks different, and I don't believe they do.
Okay.
Hold on. Brandon.
Yeah, just one question for clarification. Is it the desire for the text change to go ahead and move forward and come back to the council in August for consideration, but for the MEA to come to the committee in August?
Yes. And then what we'll do is we'll make that clear when we go to the full council in July. So we don't have to go back to if we make it clear when we make the motion in July, then it should be fine going forward. I think I can at least draft 4 votes for that to happen.
All right, so then I may stumble through this, but so I'm going to be decisive. So I move that we approve the proposed text change language and recommend to full council to begin that process, and that we also direct staff to devise a new MEA and to bring that to our next Transportation and Transit Committee meeting, and that we direct the city attorney's office to place on the full council agenda the language necessary to give staff the authority to execute the MEA contracts and process. That's the motion.
Okay.
And that authorization would include the extension of the existing
and
agreement with Gotcha.
Yes, and that we authorize an extension of the existing agreement with Gotcha for up to 6 months or until we are prepared to engage and execute the new MEAs, and that Gotcha will participate in that process should they choose.
Okay. Is there a second? Counselor Stewart has second. All right. Any questions? And to vote, please everyone raise your hand. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Mr. Assistant Clerk, it passed unanimously.
I have two more things, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay.
One, I think that if possible, and I appreciate the work staff has done, but if we could have a goal, and we can discuss this more at the next meeting, but if we could have a goal for that new MEA or RFP process to be shorter than 90 days, like 45 to 60 days, and see if we could get some providers operating in the fall, that would be my preference. And the other piece that we didn't talk about today is I do think that having designated parking zones, at least in our very high traffic areas like Fayetteville Street and Glenwood South, would be helpful. And that may be something that we need to look at. It's almost like a concurrent issue, and maybe we could just have that ready to go once we know that the providers are going to be up and running. So if we're looking at like a fall launch date, hopefully, then to have a policy in place around the launch that talks about the parking issue. So I'm not sure how that's handled, but I think that that is a good idea.
Councilmember, I think we can incorporate both of those things in your follow-up in August. And certainly, I think some of the timeframes were conservative here from a broad planning perspective, and we could certainly include in your next presentation more of a proposed schedule that would give you a better sense of what the timeline would look like.
Right, and I think the parking they've been working on, but Director Moore.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem. I was going to say, Councilmember, we have been working on identifying locations in the Glenwood South area in particular. There's sidewalks are a bit constricted there. Hate to blame everything on COVID, but the COVID issues kind of put the brakes on that for a little while as folks were staying home. But we've got a handful of locations identified. We're looking at a few others, and we were even down to the point of how we would designate those as zones, and we're going to work backwards with the companies to help maybe geofence or geolocate those spots. So that was well in the works when we had to kind of pump the brakes.
Okay. And also one thing I want to remind the committee, the time frame on this also is on us. Staff will bring us a draft in August. Once that draft is approved by us, it then goes to the full council for approval. So let's keep that in mind as well as we move this forward of our responsibility to making sure staff has what they need to work in the timely fashion that we're requesting. So, yes, Ralph.
Mr. Chairman, part of just a clarification, what is actually going out to the council for recommendation is the text change process on the definition.
Yes.
The rest of it is really directions to staff. Is this correct?
Actually, all of that has to go out to council because we have to get council's okay that the direction we gave to staff is suffice.
Okay.
Are approved.
In that case, even with this, the item itself still remains in committee because it's not fully reported out. Correct.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And then also Tanzia assists with any things between now and then that we may need to put in the
I'm happy to. Yeah, we'll just want to make sure that it's clear that you're also looking for authorizing or recommending action by the council on the delegation of authority to staff. So that is the
Correct.
other second recommendation here that wouldn't come back to the committee for follow-up.
That's right.
Gotcha. Councilor Milton.
Yeah, just to clarify, I do think we should at least refer out of committee the text change process for the scooter so we can at least get that moving.
We did. Your motion did that.
That's what it was. Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Yeah. All right. All right. Anything else on micro mobility? All right. With that, we will move to first of all, I want to thank all the vendors. You can stay on if you want to learn more about our strategic plan with transit and the transportation committee that came out of a retreat. But otherwise, we will now move on to our next item on the agenda. And go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We have Stephanie Olson here, who is our Manager of Strategic Planning and Performance Analytics. She is going to go through this presentation pretty quickly. We know that many of you have already participated in discussions this week. However, I think she'll hit some of those same slides for members of the public that might be watching this meeting that didn't watch the other meeting. So she'll move quickly, but some of the content that you will be seeing. Just a reminder in terms of our purpose here is, one, to get some of your affirmation on some of the technical corrections that staff is proposing. I will say for this particular key focus area, there are some recommendations from staff to increase clarity of some of the underlying intentionality that we think are in the objectives. We do want to be clear that those initiatives or objectives might continue to evolve as we add more of the aspirational policy language that you identify today or as we go through the process. We just kind of want to reset the table, but it isn't in any way an indication that we believe that those suggested changes will stay static as we go through this process. So again, Stephanie will go through some of those technical corrections. She'll remind you of some of the other aspirational discussions that you've already had or other future focused conversations and recommendations that came from the staff at your retreat. And then you'll have an opportunity to talk about next steps. That, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
Great, thank you, Chauncey. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all. So like Chauncey said, the first couple of slides you all have seen, so I will move through those relatively quickly, but do want to just capture a few of the points from those slides for anyone who is listening. So again, we're going to start with a brief background on Raleigh's strategic plan. Again, recap the revision process for the new plan. Then we'll spend some time going through the recommendations from the Transportation and Transit Core Team. And then finally, have some time for discussion with you all about feedback and next steps. So again, in Raleigh, it's really important that we kind of start with this saying that we have is that the strategic plan is a solid foundation for an intentional future. And so really these first couple slides just go over how we in the city align our efforts and our resources with the priorities that you all identify in the strategic plan. And so it really allows us the opportunity to make sure that our resources are aligned in the appropriate way to meet your vision and that we're measuring our progress and making sure we're staying on track. It also provides us an opportunity to be clear with the employees and the community about where we're going as an organization, and it helps us to provide a framework for collaborating across departments. So in the city, our strategic plan, our business planning process, and our individual work plans and goals all align. So it's very important that we kind of understand council's direction and we make sure to weave that through all of the work that we do as a city. So the first strategic plan was adopted in April 2015. It is the fiscal year 16 through 20 strategic plan. And so we're wrapping that one up right now. And it's time to rewrite the plan at this point. The plan does have 6 key focus areas. The one that we're focusing on today is transportation and transit. And each of those key focus areas includes a number of objectives, initiatives, and performance measures. And council does go through the plan on a yearly basis to make sure that it stays relevant and up to date. So again, an objective is really that strategic goal level language that indicates the results that we're looking to achieve, and the initiatives take it a step further and provides an action statement that outlines the strategies and actions that will help us achieve our objectives. So an example here is Objective 1 in Transportation and Transit, develop a unified and coordinated transportation and land use vision implemented through effective and efficient project delivery. And the initiative takes that a step further and directed us to review and evaluate the project delivery process. We do communicate the strategic plan through a number of channels throughout the year. We have our semi-annual core staff meetings, which is where staff provides updates to city leadership on the progress on our initiatives and our performance measures. We also report that information out through the annual year-end performance report. The most recent one is here on your screen from fiscal year 19. We also give regular progress updates at city council retreats as well as city council meetings, and we update our strategic planning website on a regular basis. So here, just wanted to reiterate the process that we're going through. So far we have come to your city council retreat and received some initial feedback. So we'll be going over that today. And then we also had our core teams develop cleanup recommendations for council consideration. That includes some completed initiatives and some technical language changes. As Tansy mentioned, I'll start here with the core team recommendations, but do want to emphasize that that's just a starting point, and we recognize that more work will need to be done before the draft is complete. And then after this, next steps will be further revisions. And so you have a number of options before you for how to go about doing that. But we anticipate that council will give us direction today, and we can bring back revisions for review and feedback. And then we'll plan to present the entire strategic plan for city council approval at your city council retreat for some additional feedback from the council as a whole. So with that, I'm going to dive into the work that the core team did. Just wanted to recognize that this is the group of individuals that worked really hard to put together these recommendations. And so I wanted to just take a minute to thank them for their efforts and their guidance. So first, I'm going to start with a number of initiatives that we had recommended be marked as complete. And just a reminder, all of this information and some additional details was attached to your agenda. So if you'd like to look at the memo while I'm talking, that information is in there as well. So really briefly, Initiative 1.3 talks about reviewing regional data, growth projections, development potential, and area planning, and reflect data and investments in transportation capital projects. This has really been operationalized in our departments and is done on an ongoing basis. So when I say it's operationalized, it's no longer necessarily a strategic vision that we have, but it's really become part of our day-to-day operations. Initiative 2.2 speaks about evaluating usage data and public feedback to modify and improve the transportation experience, with emphasis on bus cleanliness, safety, amenities, and on-time service. Again, this has been operationalized. There's a survey that goes out to individuals who ride the bus and use our transportation system, and that's tracked and reported on a regular basis and will continue to be reported through performance measures. Initiative 3.1 speaks to evaluating existing relationships, explore and develop potential partnerships that would improve regional mobility. These relationships have been created and are a key part of many transportation and initiatives and projects. And so the team felt like that particular initiative could potentially be removed from the strategic plan and marked as complete. Initiative 3.2 speaks about expand the transit service and complete infrastructure projects approved in the 2016 transit referendum to include transit-supported multimodal infrastructure included in the 2017 transportation bond. Implementation of this bond has become part of our regular operations. And then the final one that the team recommended marking as complete is actually an objective. This is establish Raleigh as the leader in transportation innovation. We felt like the city uses innovation as a foundation to achieve all of our initiatives, and that this has been operationalized and could potentially be replaced with something that council would like us to focus on moving forward. Now, the next one is actually a recommendation to divide one initiative into two separate initiatives. Staff was finding that there were different strategies to go about addressing kind of the two different parts of this original initiative. And so here's the recommended language on your screen. One initiative would speak to exploring opportunities to improve the carbon footprint of the municipal fleet. So that one's more internally focused. And then pursuing infrastructure and policy strategies to allow the public to transition to electrification or other alternatives that would reduce the impact of carbon emissions. So that one is more externally focused. Now I'm going to move on to a number of initiatives where updated language was recommended. And so on your screen, I put the language as it would stand with the recommendations included. So initiative 1.1 would read, implement a citywide project management software to enhance project delivery. This one shifted the language from reviewing and evaluating to implementation of the software. We're using eBuilder throughout the city as our software to implement projects. Then objective 2 would read, enhance the multimodal transportation network to reduce reliance on single occupancy vehicles and lower carbon emissions. This one really strengthened the language around trying to diversify modes of transportation, and it also tied the language into our community-wide climate action plan efforts. Here are a couple of more where updated language was recommended. Initiative 2.4 would read, make investments and policy recommendations to position greenway trails as transportation options on corridors that have been marked as priorities in the Greenway Master Plan. So this really added that piece about recognizing the need for some policy recommendations around moving this initiative forward. And then it also attempted to tie the language into our Greenway Master Planning efforts. Then objective 3 would read, maintain existing and develop new partnerships to improve regional mobility. And this one really continued our focus on enhancing regional mobility. So before we dive into some of the feedback that council had given at your retreat, just wanted to take a minute, step back, hear your thoughts about these revisions and see if there's any changes that you would recommend.
Okay, Councilor Stewart.
Thank you. Sorry, the cat's right there. Off screen though. I'm really excited about the updated language around mode share. We've been having some conversations about that for quite some time, and I want to ask or really ask for feedback on whether or not it makes sense to include some benchmarks or metrics around mode share shift, either in this plan or maybe those are kept somewhere else, but just want to flag it or highlight it or ask a question, however y'all want to handle that. But
it's a great comment. So right now we do have a number of measures that align to the initiatives and objectives in the strategic plan. There are certainly some metrics that will continue in terms of our core key performance indicators that we use at our what we call our core stat meetings and get regular updates on. But we certainly will look for new measures that are more responsive to the new policy objectives that get added into the plan.
Okay. Councilor Milton.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any proposed changes to the changes that you've proposed to us, if that makes sense. There was one initiative on here, though, that was not included in the presentation, but it's in the backup material. And I'm wondering if we could make an addition to that. It's initiative 2.1, which says identify and implement projects that strengthen connections between modes. Yes. I think as we do that, I would like to see us maybe start focusing on a little more tactical urbanism. So just sort of like temporary, high impact, low cost pop-up projects that we could, during a budget crisis won't cost that much. And when staff resources are limited, we have two really strong community groups that are willing to help with BPAC and Oaks and Spokes. And so as we're looking to identify and implement projects that strengthen the connection between modes, I think we've got opportunities to look at like temporary cycle tracks or things that allow the community to engage with and provide feedback to temporary installations that may ultimately be made permanent at some point. It's a great way to get feedback and engagement, and then also just to be really adaptive and try to push out some things quicker at low cost.
And if I can, to complement that, not just between modes, but between nodes. And what I mean by that is different parts of the city. When I think of modes, I'm thinking specifically in one area, like either downtown or Cameron Village, or Crabtree, or Triangle Town, or soon to be Old Town, when that comes up, or Tower Shopping Center. How do we? I know we have a lot of focus on the BRT piece, but those are just 4 streets, and we still have other methods of connectivity. So just something to kind of, I know it's my first time really sharing this. It's just something I've been thinking about, but how we connect the city, and this may be a part where we have to work with planning more, as far as the development, and be a little more intentional, in that, where we do more planning of our city than letting development plan our city. So just a thought in as far as that item 2.1, and it may be a subsection of that, something you pull out of that, but we're talking about identifying, and implementing projects to strengthen connections. So not just between modes, but possibly nodes.
Thank you for the comment. Just a clarification. It sounded as if the focus was really on mixed use or commercial corridors.
Right.
Or significant. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Okay. Councilman Buffkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was pleased to see the attention to the Greenway Master Plan and the coordination with our transportation goals. Can you remind us where the Greenway Master Plan process is, and kind of give us a forecast when that's going to come to council?
So we don't have Lisa Schiffbauer on as a panelist here, but Lisa, I believe, is still on as an attendee. Eric Smith, can you confirm that we can make Lisa available?
One second.
So I do believe that the plan is still in the community engagement collection process. If we can't get Lisa on, we will certainly work to get an update to the committee and the full council on the time frame.
I have Lisa. Lisa?
Yes, I'm here. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. Okay, so right now, and I hate to blame everything on COVID, as Michael Moore mentioned, but we are progressing on the Greenway Master Plan. We're in the existing system review and the needs assessment process, and we're collecting a lot of good data through the online survey that we have. But one piece of the larger puzzle that we're missing is that open house normal engagement process. So we're hoping to be able to do that in the next couple of months by spreading out meetings and maybe even doing some virtual options. We do anticipate taking an update to the Parks Board in July, just to give them a heads up on where we're at, and to have a checkpoint with them as to the progress that we've made. There will be discussion with Tansy through Oscar about doing a work session with council possibly in September, to also do some touch points with city council, just to see if we're headed in that right direction.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Cool. And the beauty now is transportation and Parks and Rec both come through Tansy, so that should help move seamlessly. All right, thank you. We'll let you continue, Stephanie. Oh, go ahead. Hold on one second. Councilman Milton.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, does someone need to make a motion to approve these proposed changes with our feedback before we move to the next section, or do you want to wait on that?
Let's wait until the end.
Okay.
Okay, I will share again, and we're going to move into the feedback that we heard from council. I will go over these at a high level, have just a couple of slides here. So at your February retreat, you had some time to talk with us about transportation and transit and some areas that you wanted us to focus on. And so listed those here while also acknowledging this was a while ago, so things may have changed. Wanted us to leverage smart technology and smart cities in this area. Pilot public-private partnership. This one, I believe, was related to something with Lyft was mentioned. Plan and invest in electric vehicle infrastructure. Keep connectivity in mind as we're working through our commuter rail projects. Include a focus on pedestrian and bicyclist safety. Looking at options for bus fare, including reducing or eliminating fare and considering mobile boarding. Looking into options to address North Raleigh traffic. Contributing to shifts in modes of transportation. And then opportunities to speed up processes for petition programs. And then last slide here, at your retreat, you heard a couple of staff identified trends and opportunities, so just wanted to bring those back to your attention. Emerging trends in technology, including micromobility, 5G, automation of vehicles, upcoming bus rapid transit projects, engagements and partnerships around private development in this area, the potential to use human-centered design as we're thinking through our projects, growth pressures and development patterns that are occurring, some funding and cost uncertainties that we're going through, which is probably even more true now than before, and then management of curb space. So the questions that we have are, do these topics still align with your priorities? Are there any that you'd like us to remove or any that you would like us to add to the consideration? So unless you'd like me to go back to any slides, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, I have a question for my fellow counselors. For the option to improve North Raleigh traffic, and Councilor Buffkin, I probably need your input here. I don't remember, did we have Pacific area? Because when you say North Raleigh, that's kind of broad in general. And I do know Campo, because of COVID-19 and cost and everything else that's happened with this at the state level, have deferred. They're deferring a lot of projects right now. Do you know any particular areas that we can home in on to kind of help give staff some direction?
That's a good question, Chairman Branch. And I might need to punt for today and talk with Councilmember Cox a little bit. If my memory serves correctly, this feedback came sort of both of us came with the same concerns about people driving too fast through neighborhoods and improvements needed on some of the main arteries in North Raleigh. The implementation of the Six Forks Road corridor redesign is of course a big deal in District A. Councilmember Cox and I share parts of Atlantic Avenue and Litchford further north, and we had some discussions about a more coordinated planning process for that corridor. It was ultimately not to blame everything on COVID, but there was another victim of the pandemic in that regard. So I don't know that I have a good answer today, but I'll talk with Councilmember Cox. But it still remains a big concern.
Okay, and I know speeding through neighborhoods, that is not only a North Raleigh issue. That's across the entire city. Speeding through neighborhoods. I get a call almost weekly from my parents about a street in particular. So, and we know they have a direct line to me. So other than that, are there any other questions about any of the other items that council gave direction to? Councilor Milton?
Yeah, it's not a question, just a comment on the let me see. The feedback for include a focus on pedestrian and bicyclist safety. I would really like to see us explicitly state moving towards a Vision Zero plan. So no pedestrian deaths or injuries due to motor vehicles. So I would love to see that in our strategic plan explicitly stated. That's all.
Okay. Councilor Stewart.
Yeah, and thinking about our continued and increased focus on equity throughout the city organization, I wonder if we want to, and I don't know if this is part of Vision Zero or nestled in somewhere else, but something that's been on my mind is how we do not have equitable sidewalk infrastructure throughout the city, in part because some communities are older than others, or because some neighborhoods don't want sidewalks. So how do we get to a goal where we do have equitable infrastructure, or let's make that a goal that we have equitable infrastructure throughout the city. So just throwing that out there.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, because you're right, you have some communities that they don't want a sidewalk down their street, or if they do, they want it on the other side, not their side. So how do we implement the equity in that?
And it may be a measurement of safety, not even like the number of sidewalks, but to that Vision Zero, to that safety aspect of, we know where these pedestrian vehicle deaths are coming. How do we make sure that those areas have adequate infrastructure? So
let me ask this question, Director Moore. I know we have maps of our streets and our street layout. Do we have a map of sidewalks of how our sidewalks are connected or not connected?
Mayor Pro Tem, we have a map. I would not want to lay a wager on how complete and comprehensive it is.
Okay.
I do know that it is. I do know that it is. It is included in a number in GIS. I know we have a number of locations mapped, but I would not. Again, I could not vouch for its comprehensiveness.
Okay. I think that information. Could you do me a favor? Can you send me just what you currently have? I know it's out of date. I know any map, as soon as you hit print, is out of date. But I think if I have that, I may be able to talk to fellow counselors and we can see what resources are needed after talking with you to help update some of our infrastructure and maps.
So Mayor Pro Tem, we actually are in a process right now of doing that. It would be there's a full-on sidewalk assessment that is citywide.
Okay.
So we have the funding. Some funding comes in out years, but right now we've got part of that underway. So you may recall that you allocated some money for us to do a fairly comprehensive asset inventory.
Right.
We started with pavement conditions.
Okay.
That's underway, and that contractor has also got the ability to capture that sidewalk data and ADA ramp data, and we're working on it.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
that'll be perfect. Thank you. Councilor Buffkin.
Thank you. I've got a couple specific items of feedback that I wanted to emphasize, but just briefly on the last conversation, the Parks Department completed the neighborhood connectivity study last year or the year before, and there was a lot of inventorying of gaps in sidewalks, barriers to pedestrians. That may be useful background as you all gather that sidewalk specific data. I know you're aware of it, but I just mentioned that for as a resource that may be helpful. So a couple of the points of feedback I just wanted to emphasize, and smart cities. While we were listening, I Googled the list of smart cities, that have that label, and I think that's definitely a group of cities we want to be in a group with, and a list we want to be on. Although reflecting on our retreat and thinking about it now, I'm not sure there's a lot of clarity, either me personally or in the community, of what exactly a smart city is and what it would take to get there. But I do think that's, from as I in the way that I understand it, I think it'd be really important to our city overall, and specifically for transit. A couple things that were on our list that may have been changed significantly over the last 6 months. Budget pressures, maybe have changed our view of bus fare and the decisions that we made on mobile ticketing. So that might be worth revisiting given our new context. Not that the goals should change, but the process for getting there may be a little different, maybe longer, but maybe not. So I just note that as sort of maybe a follow-up or a question. And then lastly, on the petition programs, I cannot recall exactly what we did in our most recent budget, but I think we suspended applications in at least one petition program. So maybe if you could give me some help on reminding me, which programs are we talking about, and what's the status of those programs?
Tansy or Michael, do you want to take that one?
So I think it's better for Michael to jump in. I believe it was your sidewalk
I think it's
project
sidewalks.
that you stopped accepting new applications for petitions,
Right.
given the number of projects already in queue. And that clearly is a phenomenon that is shared by other petition programs as well. So that set of conditions was not unique to sidewalk, but I think there was, in the context of some other funding decisions that you made, there was a unique opportunity, I think, for you to give that direction there. But we can certainly, I think there is some thinking happening within transportation, particularly around traffic calming and the demand there, and our both of our staff resources and our financial resources. So I think there is an opportunity for us to address those broader petition issues in this context. Michael might have a correction or an addition. Doesn't look like it. So
no, that is correct. It was the sidewalk process, and we will be back in front of you to talk about street calming, hopefully here in the near future. Just to talk about how we want to revamp that program to take some of the guardrails off of it and make it a little quicker to implementation than we have on that now. So,
okay. All right. So as far as the feedback that we gave at the retreat, as well as the staff recommendations, is there anything counselors feel we need to modify, change, or is there a motion for them to go forward with actions, and then at a later date they'll come back to us before going to the full, coming back to us as a full council at the retreat? Councilor Milton.
Yeah, I move that staff move forward with the proposed changes and with comments that we have given during this meeting today.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second? Councilor Buffkin, second the motion. So this time, any other questions? All in favor, say aye. Raise your hand, please. Any opposed? Ralph, that was unanimous.
thank you for the high level of engagement and feedback. It's helpful.
Definitely. Thank you all. And I believe we are now, I know we had another pending item, but that is not for today's agenda. So is there anything else from staff or Tansy, do you all have anything else?
No, we're good. Thank you very much.
All right. Any counselors have anything? All right. Assistant City Attorney, anything from you that we need to know? All right. With that being said, thank you all, and this meeting is adjourned.